3 days. That's how long my son had been married before I found out, not 3 minutes after the ceremony. Not 3 hours later because someone forgot to call. 3 whole days. I learned my only child had gotten married the same way I learned my neighbor's granddaughter had won a spelling bee, by accident. It was a Tuesday morning in early October. The kind of mountain morning we get here in Asheville when the air is cool enough for a sweater, but the sun still promises a warm afternoon. I had just poured my second cup of coffee. Harold's mug was still sitting in its usual place beside mine, empty. It had been empty for almost 6 years, and I still couldn't bring myself to move it. People ask why widows keep doing things like that. I don't think they understand. When you've spent 37 years reaching for the same person every morning, your hands don't simply forget because your heart has to. Some habits become another way of loving someone. I carried my coffee to the kitchen table and opened my phone, planning to look at the weather before heading out to the garden. The tomatoes still needed picking before the first frost. Harold always said I worried too much about the tomatoes. They've survived worse than one chilly night. He was the only person who ever called me. I used to pretend I hated it. Truth is, I haven't let anyone call me that since the day we buried him. I smiled without meaning to. Then I opened Facebook. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. Mostly pictures of my church friends' grandchildren, maybe a recipe I'd never actually make. One of those videos where somebody teaches a golden retriever to ring a bell for treats. Ordinary things. Little pieces of other people's lives. I scrolled past vacation pictures. A birthday cake. Someone complaining about the price of eggs. Then, my thumb stopped moving. There was Daniel, my Daniel, standing in a charcoal gray suit I'd never seen before. Beside him stood Emily in a lace wedding dress. They were both smiling, the kind of smiles you don't fake. Behind them, autumn leaves covered the ground in shades of red and gold. The caption read, "Still floating after the happiest weekend of our lives. Thank you to everyone who celebrated with us." I stared at the words. Once, twice, 3 times. My mind refused to arrange them into anything that made sense. Weekend, celebrated, us. I remember thinking there had to be another explanation. Maybe they'd gone to someone else's wedding. Maybe it was an anniversary photo. Maybe. Then I noticed the rings. Simple gold bands catching the afternoon sunlight. My coffee slipped from my hand. The mug shattered against the kitchen tile. Coffee spread across the floor and soaked into my socks. I didn't move. I couldn't, because all I could hear over the sound of the ceramic breaking was the silence. No phone call. No invitation. No mom, we're thinking of getting married. No, I hope you can come. Nothing. 3 days had passed. 3 whole days. And somehow, my son had become somebody's husband, without telling his own mother. If you'd asked me the week before whether Daniel and I were close, I would have said yes. Not perfect, no family is, but close. He called most Sundays. Stopped by when something in his house needed fixing because, according to him, Dad taught me a lot, but you always know where he hid the good tools. Every Thanksgiving he insisted on carving the turkey, even though Harold had always claimed that job. He still called my chicken pot pie medicine. Still hugged me before he left. Still kissed my forehead when he thought I was worrying too much. Nothing about our life together prepared me for that photograph. Nothing. People hear a story like mine and immediately start looking for the one big fight. The shouting match. The slammed door. The dramatic family feud. I wish it had been that simple, because if there had been one terrible day, I could have pointed to it. Instead, our story unraveled the way old sweaters do. One loose thread. Then another. So, you don't realize you're holding pieces instead of the whole thing until it's already too late. Looking back now, I can see where the thread first began to pull. Not on the morning I found the wedding photo, not even the week before. It started almost 3 years earlier, the first time Daniel brought Emily home for Sunday dinner. At the time, I thought I was watching my son fall in love. I didn't realize I was also watching our family begin to change. And I had no idea how quietly the distance between us was already beginning. When you've been married for 37 years, people assume you eventually stop talking about your husband. You don't. You just stop expecting anyone else to understand. Harold had been gone almost 3 years when Daniel brought Emily to Sunday dinner for the first time. Sometimes that still surprises me. Not because I forgot Harold had died, you never forget something like that, but because I still measured time by him. Before Harold, after Harold. Everything else fits somewhere in between. I still caught myself reaching for the other side of the bed some mornings. Still bought 2 baked potatoes if they were on sale before remembering there was only one person eating them now. Still glanced toward his recliner whenever a baseball game was on television. Grief isn't dramatic most days. It's practical. It lives inside habits. Daniel worried about me more than he realized. He never said it directly. That wasn't his way. Instead, he'd stop by on a Wednesday evening carrying Chinese takeout because he just happened to be in the neighborhood. He lived 35 minutes away. He'd replace the batteries in my smoke detectors before they started chirping. He'd climb onto the roof every fall to clean the gutters, exactly the way Harold always had. One afternoon, I caught him tightening the loose handle on my back screen door. "I wasn't even going to mention that," I said. "I know. Then how'd you know?" He shrugged. Dad always noticed stuff like this. That answer stayed with me. Not because of what he said, because of how naturally he'd said it. Harold had been gone nearly 3 years, and Daniel was still quietly finishing jobs his father no longer could. Harold believed every home had a personality. "This old house talks," he'd say. "You just have to listen." Whenever the pipes rattled during winter, he'd pat the kitchen wall. "She's just stretching." When the porch steps creaked, "She's reminding us she's still here." Daniel used to laugh at him. "Dad, it's wood." "No, it's character." Years later, every time those same porch steps creaked beneath my feet, I heard Harold's voice before I heard the wood. Funny how love echoes like that. Daniel met Emily the spring after Harold died. I knew something was different before he ever told me. He started humming while he washed dishes after dinner. He answered text messages with that little smile people wear when they're trying very hard not to smile. One Sunday afternoon, he wandered into my kitchen and opened the refrigerator without asking. Harold used to do exactly the same thing. "Anything good in here?" "Depends. On what?" "Whether you're planning to help cook," he laughed. "I met someone." I set down the knife I was using to slice carrots. "Oh? Her name's Emily." There it was. That smile again. The one that made him look 16 instead of 32. Over the next month, I learned little pieces about her. She worked in marketing for a healthcare company, loved hiking, read mystery novels, preferred tea over coffee, which Daniel insisted was her only real flaw. "She's way out of my league." "Your father used to say the same thing about me." Daniel smiled. "Was he right?" "Oh, absolutely." He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Some moments you don't realize you're storing them away forever while they're happening. The first time Emily came to the house, I spent entirely too much time worrying about dinner. Harold would have teased me mercilessly. "Dorothy, it's just dinner." "I know. So why are there 3 pies? What if she likes pie? What if she doesn't? Then there'll be leftovers." He would have stolen a spoonful of mashed potatoes while I wasn't looking. I'd pretend to scold him. He'd pretend to feel guilty. Neither of us would have meant a word of it. Instead, I cooked alone. Roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, apple pie. Too much food for 3 people. Old habits don't care how many chairs are empty. The doorbell rang exactly at 1 o'clock. Daniel walked in carrying flowers. Emily followed close behind. She smiled the moment our eyes met. Not politely, warmly. "Mrs. Bennett? Dorothy?" She laughed nervously. "Dorothy, it's so nice to finally meet you." "You too." She handed me a small paper bag. "I brought lemon bars." I looked at Daniel. "You told her." He raised both hands. "I might have mentioned they're your favorite." Emily looked embarrassed. "I hope that wasn't strange." "Only if they're store-bought," she grinned. "I made them." "Then you're welcome back anytime." The tension dissolved immediately. Dinner was easy. Easier than I'd expected. Emily listened more than she talked. She asked about Harold after noticing his photograph on the mantel. Most people avoided mentioning him. She didn't. What was he like? I smiled before I answered. "Impossible." Daniel laughed. "That's actually true." He thought every hardware store deserved at least 2 hours of his attention. Emily smiled. "My dad's exactly like that." "Oh?" "He once drove 45 minutes because another store had better screws." Daniel nearly choked laughing. Dad would have respected that. For a little while, it felt wonderfully ordinary. Exactly what I'd hoped for. After dinner, Daniel offered to wash dishes. Emily joined him. I stood at the sink drying plates while the two of them argued, good-naturedly, about the correct way to load a dishwasher. "There is a correct way," Daniel insisted. "There really isn't." "There absolutely is." Emily rolled her eyes. "I can already tell who taught you." My father, I was going to say your mother, I laughed. Trust me. The dishwasher obsession belonged entirely to Harold. Daniel nodded. Mom would have loaded everything sideways if Dad hadn't complained. I still do. You absolutely do. Emily looked between us and smiled. I like this. What? The way you tease each other. It feels. She searched for the word. Comfortable. Comfortable. I remember thinking that was exactly the right word. Not impressive, not perfect. Comfortable. The kind of family where everyone knew where the cookie jar was kept. When they were getting ready to leave, Emily paused beside Harold's photograph. She studied it quietly for a moment. He looks kind. He was. He would have liked you. She looked surprised. You don't even know me. I know the way you looked at my son all afternoon, she smiled. And Harold believed that told you almost everything worth knowing for just a second. Her eyes filled with tears. She blinked them away before Daniel noticed. Thank you. I watched them drive away from the front porch. Daniel reached across the center console to hold her hand before they even reached the stop sign. It made me smile. Every mother wants to see her child loved. I stood there a long moment after their car disappeared around the corner. The porch suddenly felt very quiet again. Inside, I wrapped the leftover lemon bars and placed them in the refrigerator. There was enough roast chicken for another 2 dinners. Enough pie for half the week? I caught myself smiling. Maybe. Just maybe. This house was about to feel full again. I couldn't have been happier for them. Looking back now, that's the hardest part to explain. Because when people hear what happened later, they assume I disliked Emily from the beginning. I didn't. I truly didn't. If anything, I was already imagining Thanksgiving dinners. Future grandchildren running through the backyard. Harold's old fishing pole being passed down one day. I thought our family was growing. I didn't realize. Families can grow and drift apart at exactly the same time. And the first thread had already begun to loosen. People always ask when everything changed. I wish there were an easy answer. A Thanksgiving where somebody finally said the unforgivable thing. There wasn't. If there had been, I might have fixed it. Instead, our family changed the way daylight disappears in late autumn. You don't notice it happening from one afternoon to the next. Then one evening you look outside and wonder why it's already dark. Daniel and Emily had been together about 6 months when I met her parents, Patricia and Richard Collins. They invited all of us to dinner at their house. It'll be nice, Daniel said. You'll like them. I believed him. Daniel had inherited Harold's habit of expecting the best in people. Most of the time, that was one of his finest qualities. Their home sat on the north side of Asheville, in one of those neighborhoods where every lawn looked professionally trimmed. The kind where nobody's garbage cans stayed visible after pickup day. Everything was beautiful. Everything matched. Everything felt carefully arranged. Emily greeted us at the door with a hug. I'm so glad you came. So am I. She looked genuinely happy. That mattered. Patricia appeared a moment later. She was elegant without trying to be, perfect hair, perfect makeup. One of those women who somehow looked pressed and polished, even inside her own kitchen. Dorothy. She smiled warmly. I've heard so much about you. I hope most of it was true. She laughed. I suppose that depends who was telling the stories. It was charming, easy. Nothing about the evening suggested what would come later. Dinner smelled wonderful, roast beef, fresh rolls, rosemary potatoes. Richard carved the meat while Patricia made sure everyone's plate looked exactly right before it reached the table. She noticed everything. More iced tea, extra napkins. Who preferred white meat? Who didn't like mushrooms? I remember thinking she was remarkably attentive. Looking back, I think she simply liked being the person everyone depended on. There's a difference. I just couldn't see it yet. Halfway through dinner, Patricia smiled at Daniel. So, when are you two thinking about buying a house? Emily laughed. Mom, what? It's just conversation. Daniel smiled politely. We haven't really talked about it. You should. Patricia buttered another dinner roll. Interest rates won't stay this low forever. Richard nodded. She's probably right. Daniel looked toward Emily. Emily smiled. We'll see. It was an ordinary conversation. Families have conversations like that every day. Still, I noticed Daniel checking Emily's face before answering. Not because he was afraid. More because he wanted to be sure they were answering together. At the time, I thought that was sweet. After dinner, we carried dessert into the living room. Patricia poured coffee. Emily made tea. Daniel wandered over to the bookshelves with Richard. I found myself standing beside Harold's age-old rival. A beautifully polished grand piano. I've always wanted to learn, Patricia smiled. My mother insisted. Did you enjoy it? She hesitated. Not particularly. So why keep playing? She smiled again. Because some things become part of who you are. I understood that. Harold's woodworking had been the same. Not because he needed another birdhouse. Because building things made him feel like himself. As we were leaving, Patricia stopped Daniel near the front door. Oh, I almost forgot. She handed him a neatly folded list. I made a few recommendations. Daniel unfolded it. Contractors, mortgage brokers, financial planners, neighborhoods. I laughed softly. You've done your homework. She smiled proudly. I like helping. Daniel thanked her, folded the paper, slipped it into his coat pocket. Nothing about that moment bothered me. A mother giving advice. Perfectly normal. Isn't that what mothers do? Over the next year, Emily became part of our Sundays. Sometimes they'd come after church. Sometimes we'd grill hamburgers if the weather was nice. Sometimes we'd simply sit on the porch drinking sweet tea until the porch light came on. Those afternoons became my favorite part of the week. Emily fit into our conversations easily. She teased Daniel whenever he burned the burgers. She laughed at Harold's old stories as though she'd known him herself. One afternoon she found his tackle box in the garage. So this is the famous fishing box? Daniel laughed. You've heard about that? I've heard about nothing else. She opened the lid carefully. Everything was still exactly where Harold had left it. Old hooks, extra line, a faded photograph tucked beneath the tray. Emily picked it up. Harold and 8-year-old Daniel stood beside a creek holding 2 tiny trout. Daniel smiled. I remember that day. You hated fishing. I hated getting up at 5 in the morning. Emily laughed. So why'd you go? Daniel looked at the picture for a long moment. Because Dad asked. He smiled quietly. And because somehow he always made getting out of bed feel like an adventure. For just a second, I saw Harold standing there again, boots muddy, coffee thermos in one hand, fishing pole in the other. That evening after they left, I found the photograph still sitting on the workbench. Emily must have forgotten to put it back. I held it for a long time. Harold had always believed memories deserved to stay where people could find them. Pictures aren't for boxes, he'd tell me. They're for kitchens. The next Sunday I framed it. Daniel noticed immediately. I forgot about that picture. I know, Emily smiled. It looks nice there. It belongs where people can see it. She nodded. I think so too. I wish I could tell you that's how everything stayed simple, warm, growing. But families rarely change all at once. They change through tiny moments nobody argues about. A holiday spent somewhere different. A dinner postponed until next week. A phone call returned tomorrow instead of today. Each one seems too small to matter, until one day you realize you've been measuring your life by what used to happen instead of what still does. The first time Daniel missed one of our Sunday dinners, he called Saturday night. Mom, I'm really sorry. Emily's parents invited us to the lake tomorrow. I hope that's okay. Of course. It isn't every weekend, I know. I'll come next Sunday. I smiled after we hung up. Young couples should make new traditions. Harold would have said exactly the same thing. I even remember looking toward his photograph and saying out loud, "Don't worry, they'll be here next week." They weren't. And somehow, that became the beginning of a new pattern, one I didn't recognize until it had quietly become our life. Looking back, I think the hardest part wasn't losing time with Daniel. It was convincing myself I wasn't. Every change had a perfectly reasonable explanation. Emily's parents wanted to host Easter. Well, of course they did. Daniel had started a new position at work. Naturally, he was busy. Emily was planning a charity fundraiser. She couldn't be in 2 places at once. Life gets complicated when children grow up. I've told myself that countless times. Sometimes it was true. Sometimes it was simply easier to believe than the alternative. Harold used to say families needed ordinary days more than special ones. It isn't Christmas that keeps people close, he'd tell Daniel. It's Tuesday. Daniel was 12 the first time he heard that. We were cleaning leaves out of the backyard after a windstorm. He leaned on his rake and frowned. That doesn't make any sense. Harold smiled. How many Christmases do you get every year? 1. How many Tuesdays? Daniel thought for a second. A lot. Exactly. You build a family one ordinary day at a time. I didn't understand how wise that was until years later, because we didn't lose our family at Christmas. We lost it one ordinary Sunday after another. By the following spring, Sunday dinners had quietly become whenever everyone could make it. Then maybe next weekend. Then, every few weeks. The dining room looked exactly the same. 4 plates, 4 glasses. The roast still smelled the way Harold had always liked it, only now, more often than not, 2 of those plates went back into the cupboard untouched. I'd wrap the leftovers carefully and tell myself there was nothing unusual about it. Young people were busy, that was all, Daniel always called. That never changed. Sometimes Sunday afternoon. Sometimes Monday evening on his drive home. "Sorry, Mom, this week got away from us, I know. We'll figure something out." He always sounded sincere, because he was. That's what made it so confusing. He wasn't pulling away. Not intentionally, he was simply trying very hard to make everyone happy. Anyone who's ever tried that knows it's impossible. One Saturday morning, I drove across town to the farmer's market. Harold had loved that place. He claimed tomatoes tasted better if you bought them from someone wearing muddy boots. I never argued with him, mostly because he was right. I was comparing peaches when someone called my name. "Dorothy?" I turned and saw Patricia. She smiled warmly. "What a nice surprise." "It certainly is." We walked together for a while, talking about the weather and rising grocery prices. Ordinary things. Comfortable things. Then she mentioned, almost casually, "We're excited for next weekend." "Oh? Emily and Daniel are coming over. They've been so busy lately." I smiled. "I'm glad you'll get to see them," she nodded. "We've been trying to make family dinners a priority." There was nothing wrong with what she'd said, nothing at all. Yet something inside me quietly tightened. Family dinners. For a brief moment, I realized she was talking about exactly the same tradition Harold and I had spent decades building. Neither of us knew we were trying to preserve the same thing. We simply assumed there was enough room for everyone. That evening, Daniel called. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart." We talked about work, the weather, a leak he'd discovered under the kitchen sink. Then he hesitated. "I probably should have mentioned." "What's that?" "We're having dinner with Emily's parents tomorrow." I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. "Oh, I hope you have fun. We'll come by next Sunday." "Of course." After we hung up, I stood at the kitchen window longer than usual. Outside, the porch swing moved gently in the breeze. Harold had built it the summer Daniel turned 10. "It'll last longer than I will." I'd scolded him for saying things like that. Turns out he was right. The next few months followed the same rhythm: plans, changes, apologies, promises. None of them sounded alarming on their own. Together, they slowly became the new normal. I stopped cooking full Sunday dinners every week. Instead, I'd make soup or sandwiches, something easier to put away if nobody came. I never told Daniel that. There wasn't any point. He already felt guilty enough. One afternoon, he stopped by unexpectedly. He looked tired. More tired than I'd ever seen him. "You okay?" "Yeah." "You don't sound convinced." He smiled weakly. "Work's just been busy." I poured him coffee. He wrapped both hands around the mug the way Harold always had when something was bothering him. "You know," he said quietly, "I keep feeling like somebody's disappointed in me." I looked at him carefully. "Who?" He laughed once. "I honestly don't know anymore." Those words stayed with me long after he'd gone home, because for the first time, I realized Daniel wasn't choosing one family over another. He was trying to live inside 2 sets of expectations that never seemed to stop growing. Emily noticed it too. A week later, she called me while Daniel was working late. It was the first time she'd ever phoned me herself. "Dorothy?" "Hi, sweetheart. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." She hesitated. "I wanted your recipe." "My recipe?" "The chicken pot pie," I laughed. "So that's Daniel's doing." He keeps saying mine isn't as good. I'm sure it is. No, it really isn't. For nearly an hour we talked about pie crusts, frozen peas, and whether fresh thyme made enough difference to justify buying it. It was easy, natural. Before hanging up, she said something that made me smile. "I hope one day I cook it as well as you." "You will. It just takes practice." At the time, I believed we had years to share recipes. Years to become the kind of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law who called each other just because. I had no reason to think otherwise. Then autumn arrived. Daniel invited me to lunch near his office, just the 2 of us. He looked relieved to have an afternoon without schedules, without rushing, without checking his watch. Halfway through the meal, he smiled. "You know what I miss?" "What?" "Sunday naps." I laughed. "You never liked them." I didn't. But I liked waking up knowing everybody was still in the house. I looked at him. He stirred his iced tea slowly. It felt. He searched for the word. Anchored. I knew exactly what he meant. Home isn't always a place. Sometimes, it's simply the feeling that nobody is in a hurry to leave. When we finished eating, Daniel hugged me in the parking lot. It wasn't unusual. He'd hugged me goodbye all his life. But this time he held on just a little longer. As he stepped back, he opened his mouth as though he wanted to say something else. Instead, he smiled. "I'll call you tonight." He did, right on time. We talked for 20 minutes, nothing important, nothing dramatic. If you'd listened to that conversation, you would have said we sounded like any other mother and son. And you would have been right. That's why I never imagined that the biggest changes in a family can happen long before anyone realizes they're changing at all. The first Thanksgiving after Daniel and Emily got engaged should have been one of the happiest days of my life. In many ways, it was. Daniel had proposed 2 weeks earlier during a hike along the Blue Ridge Parkway. He called me before they were even back in the car. She said yes. I laughed so loudly he had to hold the phone away from his ear. "I suppose congratulations are in order." "I hope so. I've never seen a man sound so nervous after getting the answer he wanted." He laughed. "I think I'm still catching my breath." When we hung up, I looked toward Harold's photograph on the mantel. "Can you believe it? Our little boy is getting married." The house was quiet, but somehow it didn't feel lonely that afternoon. It felt full, almost as though Harold already knew. Planning a wedding has a funny way of making everyone feel busy. There were venues to tour, guest lists to discuss, flowers, cake tastings, photographers. Every week, Daniel seemed to have another appointment written on the family calendar he still kept on his refrigerator. Sometimes he'd stop by after work carrying brochures. "What do you think? I think all these places look expensive." "They are, so why are we looking at them?" Emily laughed, because apparently getting married now requires a second mortgage. Daniel pointed toward her. "That wasn't my idea." She smiled. "I know." Their teasing reminded me so much of Harold and me that I found myself smiling without realizing it. A few Saturdays later, Emily invited me to go dress shopping with her. "There'll be me, Mom." She paused, "and hopefully you." I didn't hesitate. "I'd love to." For nearly 3 hours we wandered through rows of lace and satin while Emily disappeared behind fitting room curtains. Every time she stepped onto the little platform, Patricia adjusted the train, straightened a shoulder, or tucked a loose strand of hair behind Emily's ear. She wasn't controlling, not exactly. She was simply involved, the kind of involved that comes from years of believing your help is indispensable. Emily never seemed bothered by it. She'd glance toward her mother before answering almost every question. "What do you think?" Patricia would smile. "I think you're beautiful." Then she'd add, "But let's try one more." Emily always did. At the time, I thought it was sweet. Now I wonder how often Emily had been taught to trust someone else's opinion before her own. On the drive home, Emily looked out the passenger window for a long time. Finally, she said, "My mom gets excited. I noticed. I know she can be." "A lot." I smiled. "Most mothers are." She laughed. "You've never met her during Christmas. I imagine I will." Her smile faded just a little. "I hope everyone gets along." I reached across the center console and patted her hand. "We're all on the same team." I believed that with my whole heart. A week before Thanksgiving, Daniel called, "Mom." His voice carried that familiar hesitation I'd begun noticing more often. "I need to ask you something. Go ahead." Emily's parents usually host Thanksgiving dinner. "Oh, I didn't know that. They've done it every year." I stirred the soup simmering on the stove. "So?" "We were wondering." He stopped. I waited. "What if we had lunch with you and dinner with them?" I smiled. "That sounds exhausting." He laughed with obvious relief. "So, you're okay with it?" "Of course." "I'd rather have half a day with you than none at all." I knew you'd understand. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen longer than necessary, half a Thanksgiving. It wasn't a tragedy. Families shared holidays all the time. Still, I couldn't help thinking about something Harold used to say. If you're always dividing your time, eventually somebody starts feeling divided too. At the time, I'd teased him for sounding philosophical. Now, his words lingered. Thanksgiving morning arrived bright and cold. The turkey had been in the oven since dawn. The house smelled of sage, butter, and roasted onions, exactly the way it had every Thanksgiving since Daniel was little. I still used Harold's handwritten stuffing recipe, not because I couldn't remember it, because seeing his handwriting beside the mixing bowl somehow made him feel part of the day. Daniel and Emily arrived carrying pumpkin pie. Emily hugged me tightly. "Happy Thanksgiving." "You too, sweetheart." Daniel breathed deeply. I swear this house always smells the same. It better. I've been making this meal longer than you've been alive. He laughed. I know. And I'd complain if you ever changed it. Lunch was wonderful. We laughed about old family stories. Daniel told Emily how he'd once hidden green beans in his pocket because he thought I wouldn't notice. I was 7. You were terrible at crime. Emily nearly spilled her cider laughing. I watched the two of them across the table and silently thanked Harold. This was what we'd always wanted. A family that enjoyed being together. Nothing fancy. Just people who looked forward to coming home. After dessert, Daniel glanced at his watch. The room became quieter without anyone saying a word. Emily noticed first. We should probably get going. Daniel nodded reluctantly. I guess we should. Nobody argued. Nobody complained. We simply started gathering coats. As I wrapped leftover pie for them to take home, Daniel stood beside me in the kitchen. I wish today lasted longer. It already went too fast. I'm sorry. For what? For leaving. I looked at him. You're not leaving me. You're going to another dinner. I know. It just feels... He searched for the words. Like I'm always measuring time now. I placed the pie container in his hands. You don't have to apologize for loving more than one family. His shoulders relaxed. I hope you know that. I do. But as he said it, he didn't sound completely convinced. The house felt much larger after they drove away. I washed dishes slowly. Harold had always insisted they tasted better the next day. I never figured out what that meant. Maybe he simply liked leftovers. As I dried the last plate, the phone rang. How was Thanksgiving? Wonderful. You sound tired. I am. They had to leave early. Oh, there was a pause. Then she asked, where'd they go? Emily's parents. Another silence. Finally, Ruth said gently, that must be hard. I looked around the quiet kitchen, the empty chairs. Harold's recipe card still resting on the counter. The pie server waiting to be washed. No, I answered honestly, it's just different. And I believe that. Because I still thought different was all it would ever be. December arrived with Christmas lights and colder evenings. One Saturday, Daniel stopped by alone. Emily was helping Patricia decorate her house. We spent the afternoon untangling strings of old lights from my front porch. Harold used to claim no family could survive Christmas without at least one argument over tangled lights. Daniel laughed when I told him. He wasn't wrong. For a while we worked in comfortable silence. Then, without looking up, he asked, Mom? Yeah? Do you ever feel guilty? For making somebody feel like they have to choose? The question caught me off guard. I hope not. I don't think you do. But what if someone feels that way anyway? I sat down beside him on the porch step. Daniel, look at me. He did. Love isn't pie. He frowned. What? You don't run out because you gave someone else a slice? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That sounds like something Dad would have said. I laughed. No. He would have made it about barbecue. Daniel laughed too. Then the smile slowly disappeared. I just wish everyone believed that. Those words stayed with me long after he drove home, because for the first time, I realized my son wasn't struggling to divide his holidays. He was struggling to divide his heart, and no matter how carefully he tried, someone always seemed to leave the table feeling there wasn't enough of him to go around. I still believed love could make room for everyone. I had no idea how soon someone would begin asking Daniel to prove where he belonged. Harold used to say there were two kinds of people, the ones who walked into a room and made everyone feel comfortable, and the ones who spent the whole evening trying to make sure everyone else was. Daniel belonged to the second kind. He got it from his father. If someone looked left out, he'd notice. If two people weren't speaking, he'd find a reason to bring them into the same conversation. When he was 9 years old, he split his birthday money because another little boy at school couldn't afford to go on the class field trip. Harold found out 2 weeks later. He didn't lecture him. He just smiled and said, "That's a beautiful heart." Then he looked at me and quietly added, "The only trouble with beautiful hearts is everybody wants a piece of them." At the time, I thought he was simply being sentimental. Years later, I realized he was warning me. The wedding planning became more serious after Christmas. Dates were finalized. Deposits were paid. Invitations were discussed over countless cups of coffee. Every conversation seemed to begin with excitement and end with another decision. Some were easy, flowers, music, cake flavors. Others weren't. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel stopped by carrying a thick 3-ring binder. Emily had organized the entire wedding into color-coded sections. Guest list, budget, venue, timeline. Even emergency contacts. I laughed. She could run a small country with this thing. Daniel smiled. I've told her that. He flipped through the pages. She really is amazing, I know. There wasn't the slightest hesitation in my answer, because it was true. Emily was thoughtful, organized, kind. If you'd asked me then whether she loved my son, I'd have answered without hesitation. Absolutely. Love was never the problem. Daniel pointed to one page. We're trying to keep the guest list under 100. Smart. Weddings get expensive. He nodded. They really do. He turned another page, then stopped. I noticed his smile fade just enough to matter. What is it? Oh. He closed the binder halfway. Nothing. That was Daniel. Whenever he said nothing, it usually meant something he wasn't ready to talk about. I didn't push. Harold taught me long ago that people tell you more when they don't feel cornered. A few weeks later, Emily invited me to lunch, just the two of us. We met at a little cafe downtown that Harold and I used to visit after doctor's appointments. Emily looked tired, not unhappy, just tired. You okay? She smiled. I forgot how many opinions people have about weddings. I laughed. Oh, sweetheart, you haven't even reached the seating chart yet. She groaned dramatically. Don't remind me. For a while we talked about ordinary things, work, recipes, the new bakery that had opened near her office. Then she became unusually quiet. My mom and I had an argument. That surprised me. They don't happen often? Almost never. What was it about? Emily stirred her tea without drinking it. Centerpieces? I blinked. Centerpieces? She nodded. I wanted wildflowers. She wanted roses. And Emily smiled weakly. We're having roses. She tried to laugh. It didn't quite reach her eyes. I reached across the table and touched her hand. Can I tell you something, please? The older I get, the more I realize weddings only last one day. Emily looked at me. Marriages last much longer. She nodded slowly. I know, so whenever you have to choose, I smiled. Protect the marriage, not the flower, not the napkins. Not everyone else's expectations. The marriage. She looked thoughtful. I've never heard anyone say it like that. Harold would have. He always believed people forgot what actually mattered. By early spring, Daniel had started stopping by the house more often. Not for long, sometimes only 20 minutes. Sometimes just enough time to drink a cup of coffee before heading somewhere else. At first, I thought he simply missed home. Eventually, I realized something else. Home had become the only place where nobody needed anything from him. One rainy Thursday evening, he sat across from me in the kitchen, staring at the steam rising from his coffee. You ever feel like you're disappointing everybody? The question sounded familiar. He'd asked something similar months earlier. This time, his voice carried more weight. I think everybody feels that way sometimes. He nodded. I keep telling myself it'll calm down after the wedding. It probably will. I hope so. He smiled. But every decision seems to make somebody unhappy. I didn't ask who. I already knew. Instead, I stood up and opened the old kitchen drawer where Harold kept rubber bands, spare batteries, and every instruction manual he'd refused to throw away. Buried beneath them was a worn deck of playing cards. Daniel laughed. I haven't seen those in years. Your father carried these everywhere. I shuffled the cards and dealt each of us 5. You remember what he always said? Daniel smiled before I finished. Never make big decisions when you're tired. Exactly. He also said, never play cards with Uncle Frank because he cheated. We both laughed. The tension eased for a moment. Sometimes. That's all family can do, not solve the problem. Just give someone a place where they can set it down for a little while. The wedding invitations were mailed in April. Emily called that evening. I think we've finally finished the guest list. Congratulations. I didn't know paper could cause this much stress. It can, she laughed. Then she became quiet. Dorothy? Yes? Hope you know how much Daniel loves you. The sentence seemed to arrive from nowhere. I've never doubted it. She hesitated. I don't always know how to make everybody happy. There it was again. Everybody. Such a small word. Such a heavy one. You can't. She didn't answer. You can love everybody, but you can't make everybody happy. Those are different jobs. I don't know if she believed me. I think she wanted to. A week later, Daniel called while I was planting tomatoes. Mom, you busy? Only arguing with dirt. He laughed. I need your advice. That sounds serious. It kind of is. He took a slow breath. Emily's mom thinks we should spend our first Christmas married at their house. And I wanted to alternate. That seemed reasonable. So, what's the problem? Another silence. I don't know how to say no without hurting somebody. I closed my eyes. There it was, the real problem. Not Christmas. Not schedules. Not holidays. My son believed love meant preventing disappointment, even when it cost him his own peace. Daniel, yes? Your father disappointed me all the time. He laughed. What? He forgot anniversaries. He left sawdust everywhere. He once painted half the garage before realizing he'd bought the wrong color. Daniel was laughing now, but I never questioned whether he loved me. The laughter faded. Love isn't measured by how perfectly you keep everyone comfortable. It's measured by whether people still feel safe telling you the truth. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, I wish everyone believed that. The rehearsal dinner was still months away. The wedding dress hadn't even been altered yet. To anyone looking from the outside, everything appeared perfect. A happy couple. 2 loving families. A beautiful future. Even I believe that most days, but families rarely break because people stop loving one another more often. They begin believing that love has to be divided, that every hour spent with one person is somehow taken from another, that every yes creates a no. I didn't know it yet. But someone was about to ask Daniel a question no child should ever have to answer, a question that would quietly change everything. There are moments in every family that don't seem important while they're happening. A conversation in a driveway, a phone call before bed, a sentence spoken too quickly. You don't realize until years later that your life quietly turned in a different direction because of something almost nobody remembers saying. I think that's why regrets are so stubborn. They rarely begin with dramatic mistakes. They begin with ordinary moments we thought we'd have another chance to fix. About 6 weeks before the wedding, Daniel came by after work. He looked exhausted, not the kind of tired a good night's sleep can fix, the kind that settles behind a person's eyes. I had just taken a peach cobbler out of the oven. He smiled the moment he smelled it. You made dessert. I know, my son. I was having a terrible day. Then you're right on time. We sat at the kitchen table exactly the way we had for years. 2 bowls of vanilla ice cream. Warm cobbler. The evening news humming softly in the background. For a few minutes, neither of us talked. Sometimes silence is what family sounds like. Comfortable, unhurried, safe. Harold always believed conversations happen best after people stop trying to force them. He was usually right. Finally, Daniel sighed. You ever wish you could make everybody happy? I smiled. You're asking the wrong woman. He laughed. Why? Because I've already learned you can't. He pushed the spoon through the melting ice cream. I keep thinking if I explain things better, people will understand. And do they? He looked down. Not really. He rubbed his forehead. It feels like every decision has become a scorecard. What do you mean? If we spend Saturday with Emily's parents, someone asks why we didn't stay longer. If we spend Sunday with you, someone else wonders why we left early. He shook his head. I didn't know getting married meant keeping track of time like an accountant. I listened quietly, because sometimes people aren't asking for answers. They're asking for permission to say what they've been carrying. I miss when life was simple. His voice was almost a whisper. When was that? He smiled sadly. When Dad was alive. The room fell silent. I looked toward Harold's old workshop through the kitchen window, even after all those years. I could almost picture him sanding a piece of oak while pretending not to hear us talking. He'd tell you to stop counting hours. Daniel laughed softly. He would, he'd say. I smiled. If people know you love them, they can survive a missed dinner. Daniel nodded. But what if they don't believe you? That question lingered between us. Not because I didn't have an answer. Because I wasn't sure he was really asking about dinners anymore. The following weekend, Emily called. Dorothy? Hi, sweetheart, do you have a minute? Always. She sounded unusually quiet. I've been thinking about something you said. Oh? You told me to protect the marriage. I remember. I've been trying. And I don't know if I'm doing a very good job. I waited. My mom keeps reminding me this is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, isn't it? It is. But... She stopped. I spend most days worrying about disappointing somebody. I closed my eyes. It broke my heart hearing those words from both of them. Different voices, same burden. Emily? Yes? When Harold and I got married, we made a promise. What kind of promise? No matter how much we loved our parents, our marriage would become our first home. She was quiet. That didn't mean we loved anyone less. It just meant we had to build something of our own, Emily whispered. I don't know if I've ever thought about it like that. I know. A few days later, Daniel invited me to lunch. He looked restless, Every few minutes he glanced at his phone. Finally, I smiled. "You can answer it." He looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "It's okay." He silenced the screen instead. "No, it can wait." After lunch, we walked toward the parking lot. Halfway there, his phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen. His shoulders tightened. "You should probably get that." He hesitated, then answered. "Hey." I couldn't hear the other voice. "Only Daniel." "No. I understand. I'm with Mom right now." He looked toward me, almost apologetically. "I know. I'll head over when we're done." A pause. "No." I said, "I'll head over." Another pause. Then quietly, "Okay." He ended the call. Neither of us spoke for several steps. Finally, he sighed. "I have to go, of course. I'm sorry." I smiled. "You've apologized more this month than you did your entire childhood." He laughed. "I know. He searched for the words. "I hate feeling like I'm letting somebody down." I put my hand on his shoulder. "The people who love you shouldn't measure your love with a stopwatch." He smiled. "I wish everyone saw it that way." Then he drove away. I watched until his truck disappeared around the corner. Something inside me whispered that he wasn't really leaving lunch, he was leaving peace. The wedding invitations had all been answered by then. The seating chart was finished, flowers ordered, music chosen. Everything looked perfect on paper. Then one evening, Emily stopped by unexpectedly. She looked like she'd been crying. I needed to get out of the house. "What happened?" She sat at my kitchen table without taking off her coat, I think. She wiped her eyes. "I think we're forgetting why we're getting married." Those words caught me completely off guard. "What do you mean?" She laughed bitterly. "I've spent 3 hours discussing where people should sit. Yesterday it was napkin colors. The day before, who gets invited to the rehearsal dinner?" She looked around my quiet kitchen. "I don't think Daniel and I have had a real conversation in weeks." I poured her a cup of tea. "You know what Harold would have done?" "What?" "He would have canceled every meeting for one evening. And then? He'd have taken me for a cheeseburger." Emily smiled through her tears. "Really?" "He believed difficult conversations always sounded smaller over French fries." She laughed. "I would have liked Harold. He would have liked you too." I meant every word. When Emily left that night, I stood on the porch watching her taillights disappear into the darkness. For the first time, I realized something important. Emily wasn't trying to pull Daniel away from me. She was trying just as desperately as he was to keep everyone together. The trouble was, neither of them understood that you cannot build a new family while spending every day trying to satisfy the old ones. Someone eventually asks for proof. Proof of who comes first. Proof of where you belong. And once love becomes something that has to be proven, every answer begins to hurt someone. I didn't know it then, but that question was coming much sooner than any of us imagined. People spend months planning weddings, flowers, music, photographs, seating charts, menus, hotel rooms. They prepare for everything, except the emotions nobody can schedule. The night before Daniel's wedding, I ironed my dress twice, not because it needed it, because my hands wanted something to do. Harold always teased me for that. "If you're ironing something twice, you're worrying too much." "I am not, Dorothy. You ironed one sleeve 3 times. I was being thorough. You were being nervous." He'd grin, then kiss my forehead. Problem solved. Funny how memories can still make you smile, even while they're making you cry. My navy blue dress hung from the bedroom door. Simple. Nothing fancy. I'd bought it because Emily once told me blue was Harold's favorite color on me. She remembered little things like that. She always had, which is why, looking back, I find it impossible to believe she ever intended to hurt me. People are rarely that simple. Around noon, Daniel stopped by. He looked exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying invisible things. "You look terrible," he laughed. "I was hoping for something a little kinder." "I already told you the truth," he smiled. "Fair enough." I made him a sandwich. Turkey, Swiss cheese, too much mustard, exactly the way he'd eaten them since high school. He took one bite. "I swear, nobody makes these like you." "I certainly hope not." He laughed. Then, just as quickly, the laughter disappeared. "Tomorrow's going to be a good day." I said it because I believed it. He nodded. "I hope so." Hope, not excitement. Hope. The word stayed with me. After lunch, we walked into Harold's workshop. Almost nothing had changed. His old tool bench, the pegboard covered with outlines where each wrench belonged, the radio he'd refused to replace because he claimed the static gave baseball games character. Daniel ran his hand across the workbench. I still expect him to walk in. So do I, he smiled. You know what I miss most? What? Watching him fix things. He could fix almost anything. I nodded. He wasn't really fixing the lawnmower. He was teaching you patience. Daniel laughed softly. I didn't realize that until years later. He opened one of the drawers. Inside lay Harold's tape measure. The yellow one, its edges worn smooth after decades of use. Daniel picked it up. It still works. Of course. Why, of course. Your father would have considered breaking a perfectly good tape measure a personal insult. Daniel smiled, then quietly slipped it into his jacket pocket. You taking that? I was hoping, he hesitated, to keep it. I nodded. I think Harold would have liked that. He looked relieved. Some inheritances aren't written into wills. Sometimes. They fit inside a jacket pocket. Later that afternoon, I drove to the hotel where many of the guests were staying. Emily had asked if I could help welcome a few relatives arriving from out of town. The lobby buzzed with excitement. Suitcases rolled across polished floors. Children chased each other between couches. Someone was already laughing loud enough for everyone to hear. It felt joyful, exactly the way a wedding weekend should. Emily hurried across the lobby the moment she saw me. You came. I said I would. She hugged me tightly. For just a second, she didn't let go. You okay? She smiled. I'm just overwhelmed. I remember. You do? I married Harold, she laughed. Good point. For the next hour, we greeted cousins, old college friends, neighbors, and coworkers. Watching Emily move through the room reminded me why Daniel loved her. She remembered names, introduced strangers to one another, noticed who looked uncomfortable, made everyone feel included. Harold would have admired that. He'd always believed kindness was a form of intelligence. As evening approached, Patricia arrived. She looked elegant as always, perfect hair, perfect smile. She kissed Emily's cheek before immediately asking, Did the florist confirm tomorrow morning? Yes. And the photographer? Yes. The rehearsal dinner seating? Emily smiled patiently. Yes, Mom. Patricia nodded. Good, we don't want surprises. There wasn't anything cruel in her voice, just certainty. She genuinely believed taking charge was another way of loving. The rehearsal dinner began just after 6. Toasts, stories, laughter. Richard welcomed everyone. Daniel thanked the guests. Emily cried halfway through her maid of honor speech. The room felt warm, comfortable, safe, until someone asked a perfectly ordinary question. One of Daniel's college friends raised his glass, so he grinned. Where are you two spending Christmas this year? Several people laughed. It seemed harmless. Daniel smiled politely. We haven't decided yet. Across the room, Patricia answered almost automatically. Oh, they'll be with us. She laughed. It's their first Christmas as a married couple. The words floated across the room, light, casual, almost unnoticed. Almost. Daniel didn't correct her. Emily looked down at her plate. Nobody else seemed to think anything of it. But I saw something pass across Daniel's face. Not anger, not frustration, weariness, the quiet kind that comes from realizing a decision has already been made, without you. A few minutes later, he stepped outside for some air. I found him standing alone beneath the hotel lights. You disappearing already? He smiled weakly. Just needed 5 minutes. Neither of us spoke. Cars passed on the road beyond the parking lot. Somewhere inside the ballroom, people were laughing. Finally, he asked, Mom? Yeah? Did Dad ever feel like this? Like what? Like no matter what he chose, someone would end up disappointed. I thought about Harold for a long moment. Then I smiled. All the time. Daniel looked surprised. He just never let disappointment make his decisions. He stared across the parking lot. I don't know how he did that. He remembered something important. What? That love given freely is a gift. But love demanded as proof. I looked at my son. Eventually becomes a burden. He didn't answer. Because he didn't need to. For the first time, I think he understood exactly what I meant. Before we went back inside, Daniel reached into his jacket and touched Harold's old tape measure, almost without thinking. The same way children reach for a parent's hand. I wish he were here. So do I. He'd know what to do. I smiled gently. No. He'd probably be just as confused. Daniel laughed. Really? Oh, absolutely. But he'd remind you of one thing. What's that? I looked at him. The people who truly love you should never ask you to prove it. That night, I drove home believing the hardest part was over. Tomorrow, my son would marry the woman he loved. Two good families would become one. Harold's empty chair would ache a little more than usual, but life would move forward. I had no way of knowing that before another week had passed, one decision, made quietly, without anger, without shouting, would leave me staring at a photograph on my phone, wondering how my own child could become a husband, without his mother even knowing, for 3 days. I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. That sounds foolish now, but when your heart refuses to accept something, your mind becomes surprisingly creative. Maybe the photographs had been taken weeks earlier. Maybe they'd signed paperwork before the ceremony. Maybe they were planning another celebration. Maybe my invitation had been lost. People cling to impossible explanations because the truth asks too much of them all at once. I know I did. The coffee had already dried across the kitchen floor before I finally remembered to clean it. One of Harold's old ceramic mugs had shattered when it slipped from my hand, blue with tiny white stripes. It had survived 3 moves, 37 years of marriage, countless mornings together. Now it lay in pieces beside my feet. I knelt slowly and began gathering the broken pieces. For some reason, I cried harder over the mug than the photograph. Perhaps because broken pottery is easier to understand than a broken heart. The house felt unusually quiet that afternoon, not because silence was unfamiliar. Widows become close friends with silence. This silence was different. It had questions inside it, questions that refused to leave me alone. When had they decided? Who had been there? Had anyone asked? Shouldn't Daniel's mother know? Or had no one thought of me at all? That last question hurt the most. I picked up my phone again. The picture was still there. Hundreds of little hearts floated beneath it. Congratulations, beautiful couple. Perfect day. So happy for you both. I kept scrolling. More photographs. Emily laughing beneath a canopy of autumn leaves. Daniel adjusting her veil before the ceremony. The first dance. The cake. A group picture outside the chapel. I searched every photograph. Not because I expected to find myself, because I wanted to understand who had shared the day with my son when I hadn't. There was Richard, smiling proudly beside Emily. Patricia stood with one arm around her daughter. College friends, co-workers, neighbors I vaguely recognized from earlier dinners. Even Emily's second cousin, the young man who had spilled sweet tea at Thanksgiving, was standing in one picture. I remembered his name after a moment. Kyle. Kyle had been invited. I hadn't. The realization settled over me with terrifying calm. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had made a guest list. Someone had looked at that list. Someone had decided. Daniel's mother wouldn't be on it. I closed Facebook, then opened it again. Sometimes disbelief needs confirmation. The photographs hadn't changed. Neither had the truth. The phone rang around 4 o'clock for one impossible second. I thought it might be Daniel. Instead, it was Ruth, my younger sister. Hey, are you busy? I looked around the empty kitchen. No, you sound strange. I'm tired. There was a pause. You sure? I almost told her. The words reached the back of my throat, then stopped. How do you say something like that aloud? How do you tell your own sister that your only child got married? And you weren't there. I couldn't. Not yet. I'm just having one of those days. Ruth didn't push. She knew grief well enough to recognize when someone wasn't ready. Call me if you need anything, I will. After we hung up, I realized I had just protected Daniel, even while my own heart was breaking. The sun had already begun slipping behind the mountains when I wandered into Harold's workshop. I hadn't planned to. My feet simply carried me there. The room still smelled faintly of cedar and machine oil. His old work apron hung from the same hook. His glasses rested on the shelf exactly where he'd left them after sanding a rocking chair for the church nursery. I sat on his stool, the one with the uneven leg. He always meant to fix it, never did. Well, I whispered into the quiet room. Our boy got married. My voice cracked. I wasn't invited. The words sounded impossible, even after saying them. Harold never offered easy answers, not even when he was alive. If I'd asked him what to do, he probably would have poured us both coffee first. Then he'd sit quietly until I stopped crying. Only after that would he speak. Don't decide anything today, Dot. That would have been his advice. He believed grief made terrible decisions. I repeated those words to myself over and over. Don't decide anything today. That evening I made tomato soup from a can, not because I wanted soup, because it was the only thing that required almost no thought. Halfway through dinner I noticed I'd set 2 spoons on the table. One for me, one beside Harold's empty place. Old habits. Again, I laughed once, then cried into my soup. Around 7:30 my phone buzzed. My heart leapt. Daniel. It wasn't a call. It wasn't even a message. Someone had tagged me in another wedding photograph. A woman from church. She wrote, "Dorothy, I thought you'd love this beautiful picture of Daniel. You must be such a proud mama." I stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't know. How could she? To everyone else, I was simply the proud mother of the groom. No one imagined. The mother of the groom had seen these pictures for the first time on Facebook. I typed 3 different replies, deleted everyone. Finally I wrote only, "Thank you, they look very happy." It wasn't a lie, they did look happy. Sometimes the truth hurts more than lies ever could. The next morning I awoke expecting everything to feel different. It didn't. The coffee still brewed at 6. The newspaper still landed at the end of the driveway. The neighbor's dog still barked at squirrels it never caught. The world hadn't changed, only mine had. That, I think, is one of the loneliest parts of heartbreak. Life continues behaving as though nothing remarkable has happened, while inside you, everything has shifted. By the 3rd day, the silence had become harder to understand than the wedding itself. Not one phone call, not one explanation, not even, "Mom, I'm sorry." I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy. What remained was something quieter, a sadness so deep, it almost felt polite. I folded laundry, watered the mums on the front porch, paid the electric bill, answered 2 emails from church. Ordinary things. Because ordinary things are sometimes the only way to survive extraordinary pain. Late that afternoon, I heard tires crunch across the gravel driveway. I looked through the living room window. A familiar pickup truck came to a stop beside Harold's old maple tree. For one heartbeat, I couldn't move. Daniel stepped out slowly. He stood beside the driver's door for a long moment, as though he wasn't sure he had the right to walk any farther. Then he looked toward the front porch. Our eyes met through the window. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us waved. For the first time in his entire life, my son looked like a little boy who knew he'd done something he could never undo. I didn't go to the door. I don't know why. I watched Daniel through the living room window for almost 2 full minutes before he finally walked across the yard. His steps were slow, careful, the way a person walks when they aren't sure of their welcome. Daniel had walked through that front door 10,000 times in his life. He'd slammed it as a teenager. He'd left it wide open every summer because Harold insisted screens were invented for a reason. He'd once carried Harold through it on his back after his father twisted his knee helping a neighbor move a refrigerator. He had never once knocked, until today. 3 quiet knocks. As though asking permission to come home, I opened the door. We looked at each other for a long moment. He was wearing the same jacket he'd had on the last time he stopped by. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in 3 days. I understood that feeling entirely. "Mom." His voice broke on the single word. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in, Daniel." He sat at the kitchen table without being asked. Harold's chair. He'd always chosen that chair without realizing it. I poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of him, sat across from him the way I had 1,000 times before. Neither of us spoke. Outside, a cardinal landed on Harold's old bird feeder and stayed a moment before flying off. I watched it go. Harold had always believed cardinals brought messages. I used to call that nonsense. I've been less certain about it since he died. Finally, Daniel wrapped both hands around his mug. Harold's gesture, exactly the same. I don't know where to start. Then start wherever feels honest. He nodded slowly, stared into the coffee. "I wanted to invite you." The words sat between us on the table like something fragile, "but you didn't." "No." I waited. Because pushing a man who is already trying to walk toward you rarely makes him arrive any faster. Emily's parents felt very strongly about a private ceremony. Patricia, specifically. Small, intimate, just our closest family. I wrapped both hands around my own mug, and I wasn't considered closest family. He flinched. It wasn't said like that. Then how was it said? He exhaled slowly. It was framed as a preference. A vision Patricia had always had for Emily's wedding. Small chapel, autumn leaves. The people she grew up with, and Daniel's mother didn't fit into that vision. He looked down. Not in the way they described it. I let those words settle. I wanted to be angry. Part of me was. But underneath the anger was something older and quieter. A sadness that had nothing to do with the wedding at all. Daniel? Yeah? Did you fight for me? He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. I tried to raise it, I suggested. Did you tell them I was not negotiable? He looked up. His eyes were red. I suggested expanding the guest list. I said your name more than once, and Patricia explained their reasoning. Emily agreed it was the right choice for the day they wanted. He set down the mug, and I let it go. Silence filled the kitchen. Not the comfortable silence of our good years. The other kind. The kind that knows exactly what it weighs. You let it go, I repeated quietly. Mom? I'm not shouting, Daniel, I know, I'm simply trying to understand. He nodded. I told myself you'd understand, that you always understand. That was the easiest thing to tell yourself. He looked down again. Yes. Harold believed the most important conversations happened when no one was trying to win them. I thought about that as I looked at my son. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was here because he couldn't live any longer with the weight of not coming. That mattered. It didn't make everything right, but it mattered. You should have called me. I know, not after the wedding. Before it. He pressed his lips together. You should have called me and said, Mom, I'm in a situation I don't know how to handle and I need your help. His eyes filled. I didn't want to put that on you. It was already on me. I was waiting by a phone that never rang, asking myself what I had done wrong. For 3 days. He reached across the table. His hand rested near mine, not touching. Close. I'm sorry, Mom. I looked at his hand for a long moment. He had Harold's hands. Same wide knuckles. Same crooked left pinky from a baseball injury at 14. Same hands that had once been small enough to hold completely inside one of mine. I covered his hand with my own. I know you are. Neither of us spoke for a while. The coffee grew cold. The cardinal came back to the bird feeder. This time, it stayed. Daniel came back twice that week. Once to fix the gutter above the back porch that had been pulling away from the fascia since July. Once for no reason at all, arriving on a Wednesday evening with a pound of coffee and a pumpkin bread from the bakery on Lexington Avenue. I didn't want anything, he said. I just wanted to sit here for a while. So we did. We sat on the porch in the October cold and didn't force a single conversation. Some visits don't need an agenda. Sometimes showing up is the whole point. Emily came 4 days after Daniel's first visit. I didn't know she was coming. I was in the kitchen cutting pears for a cobbler when I heard a car in the driveway. I looked out the window. Her car, alone. I set down the knife, dried my hands on the dish towel, waited. She knocked twice, just like Daniel had. As though neither of them felt certain of their welcome anymore. I opened the door. Emily looked different than she had at the hotel lobby 2 weeks before. The composed, attentive woman who had greeted every wedding guest by name was gone. This woman standing on my porch looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping well, which told me more than any apology could. Dorothy. Hi, sweetheart. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I always answered the door. She almost smiled. Can I come in? Of course. We sat at the kitchen table the same way Daniel and I had. Except this time I poured tea. Emily had always preferred it. She wrapped her hands around the cup and looked at the table for a long time before speaking. I don't want to explain it away. I'm not going to ask you to, 'cause there isn't an explanation that makes it okay. She looked up. There's only what happened and why I waited. My mother has always planned my life. She said it without bitterness, as though she were describing the color of the wallpaper. Simply a fact she'd only recently learned to see clearly, not cruelly, not selfishly. She genuinely believes that's what love looks like. Taking care of things so other people don't have to worry, taking over things, sometimes. She turned the teacup slowly in her hands. The wedding was her vision long before it was mine. The chapel, the flowers, the guest list. I told myself I was happy with all of it because she seemed so happy planning it. And when your name came up, she exhaled. She said it would be complicated. Complicated. That adding family from Daniel's side would change the feeling she was going for, that it was meant to feel intimate, private. I looked out toward Harold's old workshop. And you agreed. I didn't disagree. She said it honestly, not defending it. Just naming it for what it was. I've spent a long time learning to hear my mother's preferences as decisions. I didn't even realize I was doing it. When did you realize? She was quiet for a moment. When Daniel came home the night of the wedding, he should have been happy. He was. But underneath it, he looked like a man who'd left something important behind somewhere. She pressed her lips together. I asked him what was wrong. He said, "I wish my mom had been here." The words landed softly in the quiet kitchen. Outside the window, the maple tree Harold had planted the year Daniel was born moved in the October wind. Its leaves were almost gone now, just the branches remaining. Still standing, still there. "Emily?" "Yes?" "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, okay?" "Did you want me there?" She looked at me for a long time. "Yes," one word. But the weight of it filled the room. I wanted you there. I just didn't know how to want something my mother didn't want. I understood that, more than she knew. Every daughter carries some version of that struggle. Some learn to find the difference earlier than others. "I don't know how to fix it," she said. "I'm not sure you can fix it. But you can do something else." "What?" "You can make sure it doesn't become the kind of thing we carry quietly for the rest of our lives." She nodded slowly. "I don't want that either. I know." I reached across the table and refilled her tea. The most ordinary gesture in the world. She watched me do it. Then she said something I didn't expect. "You never stopped being kind to me, even when I gave you every reason to." I thought about that for a moment. Kindness isn't something I offer when people deserve it. Harold taught me that. Then it's something you give even when it's hard, especially then. Emily looked out the window. Something in her face shifted, not all at once, slowly. The way morning arrives. There was a week after Emily's visit when I didn't see either of them, not because anything had broken, because some things need quiet the way bread needs time. You can't rush it. You simply have to wait for what you've put in to become what it's meant to be. I kept myself busy the way I always had. Garden cleanup now that October had turned serious. Soup on Tuesdays. Church on Sundays. Ruth called twice and I told her most of it. She listened the way only sisters can, without interrupting, without solving, without offering the wrong kind of comfort. "What do you need?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know yet." "Then that's where you start." One Tuesday evening I sat at Harold's old writing desk. The one he'd built from a piece of black walnut he found at an estate sale in Hendersonville. He'd spent 3 weekends on it. "You're taking forever," I'd told him. "A desk has to hold weight," he'd said. "Paper's light." He'd smiled. "I don't mean paper." He always built things to last. I pulled out a sheet of cream stationery. My mother had given it to me the Christmas after Harold and I got married. I'd used it sparingly over the years, only for the things that deserved more than an email. I started writing to Harold. I do that sometimes. Not because I believe he's reading. Because it's the only way I know how to think through the things that matter most. I wrote about Daniel. About Emily, about Patricia, about the kitchen floor, about Harold's mug broken in pieces, about the cardinal. About the 3 days of silence that somehow felt longer than the 6 years since the funeral. I wrote until the page was full. Then I set it aside, looked at it for a long time. Then I took another sheet of paper. And this time I wrote to Daniel. Not to forgive him, not to accuse him, but to tell him the truth, all of it. I told him what those 3 days had felt like, not to make him feel worse. Because I believed that if he truly understood, he would never allow something like this to happen again. Not to me, not to anyone he loved. I wrote about Harold, how his father would have handled this, not with anger. Harold had never believed anger was useful. He believed in honesty and patience and giving people exactly enough rope to find their way back. People almost always come back, he used to say, if you leave the door open. I wrote about what I needed, not gifts, not gestures. Simply this, that whenever Daniel found himself in a room where a decision was being made about my place in his life, I needed him to speak. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. I told him that his father had never once made me feel like a problem to be managed. Even when life was complicated, even when families disagreed. Harold always found a way to say, quietly and without fanfare, that I belonged wherever he was. I didn't need Daniel to choose between his wife and his mother. I only needed him to remember that choosing Emily didn't require erasing me. That love isn't finite. He already knew that. He'd learned it from his father. He simply needed someone to remind him that he'd forgotten. I signed it the way I'd signed every important letter, since Daniel was a little boy. Forever and always, Mom. I folded it carefully, sealed it, set it beside Harold's desk lamp, not to mail, to deliver. There's a difference. Letters that matter deserve to be handed over in person, so the person receiving them knows you chose to come. I drove to Daniel's house on a Saturday morning, the kind of morning Asheville saves for October. Blue sky, cold enough to see your breath. The mountains in the distance so clear and close you feel like you could walk to them. Harold loved mornings like this. He'd stand on the back porch with his coffee and just look. Every season tries to outdo the last one here, he used to say. October always wins. I had the letter in my coat pocket, and a pan of peach cobbler on the passenger seat, because Harold also believed you should never arrive at a difficult conversation empty-handed. Cobbler doesn't fix anything, I told him once. No, he'd agreed. But it reminds people you were thinking about them before you arrived. That mattered. Emily answered the door. She looked surprised and relieved. Both at once. Dorothy, good morning. Daniel didn't say you were coming. Daniel doesn't know. She smiled. A real one. Opened the door wider. The house smelled like coffee and something baking. Cinnamon, maybe? Emily led me into the kitchen. It was a good kitchen, wide windows. A small herb garden on the windowsill. A dish rack beside the sink with 2 mugs drying upside down. Ordinary things. The kind that make a house feel like a home. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway holding a power drill. He stopped when he saw me. Mom, I brought cobbler. He looked at Emily. Emily shrugged. He set down the drill. We sat at their kitchen table, the 3 of us, for the first time since the wedding. Emily poured coffee. Daniel cut the cobbler while it was still warm. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. We'd all learned something about silence by now. It didn't always need to be filled. Sometimes it simply needed to be respected. After a while, I reached into my coat pocket and placed the letter on the table. I looked at Daniel. I wrote something. I'm not asking you to read it now. I just needed you to have it. He picked it up. Looked at his name on the front. My handwriting. The same handwriting that had signed every birthday card, every school permission slip, every note tucked into his lunchbox for 12 years. He pressed his lips together. Can I read it now, if you want? He glanced at Emily. She nodded. He opened it. I watched his face while he read. I wasn't looking for guilt. I was looking for recognition. The moment a person understands something they can't go back from understanding. Halfway through, his jaw tightened. Near the end, he pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully along its original creases, set it flat on the table, didn't speak for a long moment. Dad would have handled this better than I did. Probably. He wouldn't have let it get this far. No. He would have sat everyone down and reminded them what actually mattered. He had a gift for that. Daniel smiled sadly. I'm going to try to be better at it, I know. That's not enough. I know that. It's a start. Emily had been quiet through all of it. Now she looked at me across the table. I'd like to talk to my mother. About the wedding. About all of it. That's between you and her, I know. But I wanted you to know I'm going to... I nodded. Outside, the October sun moved across the kitchen floor. Slow and steady. The way time moves when nobody's rushing it. We ate the rest of the cobbler. Daniel told a story about a man at his office who had accidentally emailed his grocery list to the entire department. Emily laughed. I laughed. Daniel laughed because we were laughing. It wasn't everything. It wasn't healed, it wasn't finished, but it was real, and real was enough for a Saturday morning in October. Before I left, Daniel walked me to the car. He opened the door for me, Harold's habit, still living in the sun. Mom, yeah, I'm going to do better. I know you are. How do you know? I looked at him for a moment because you came to that door and knocked. He frowned. What does that mean? It means you knew you'd done something wrong, and you came anyway. That's what your father always said. Love isn't about never getting it wrong. It's about having the courage to come back when you do. He stood there for a moment, then he reached into his jacket pocket. Harold's old tape measure. He turned it over in his hand. I think about him every day, so do I. I'm going to try to remember what he would have done. Before I make decisions. Not after. I squeezed his arm. That's the best thing you've said to me in a long time. He smiled. The real one. Harold's smile. Living on. My granddaughter was born the following October. A Tuesday morning early while the mountains were still in shadow. Daniel called me from the hospital at 6:13. She's here, Mom. Those 2 words. That's all I needed. Her name is Alice. Alice Harold Bennett. Emily had suggested the middle name, without being asked. She said she wanted Alice to grow up knowing where she came from. I sat down at the kitchen table when Daniel told me, the same table where so many important things had happened in that house. And I cried. The good kind, the full kind, Harold's kind. He used to cry at things like this, quietly, almost embarrassed by it. I used to hand him a dish towel. He'd take it without comment. I reached for a dish towel out of habit, then laughed. Some habits are worth keeping. People ask me sometimes whether I ever truly forgave them. Daniel, Emily, Patricia, who eventually apologized in her way, briefly, practically, not quite meeting my eyes, which was, I think, the most honest thing she'd ever offered. I always give the same answer. I don't think forgiveness is a door you open once. I think it's more like Harold's workshop. You go in when something needs fixing. Some days the work is small. Some days you're there all afternoon, but the point is that you go again and again for as long as it takes, because the alternative is leaving things broken. And Harold never left anything broken that could be fixed. Alice is almost 2 now. She has Emily's eyes and Daniel's stubbornness and a laugh that fills a room completely. On Sundays, she sits in Harold's old recliner and watches cartoons with a bowl of crackers in her lap. She's too small for the chair. Her feet don't reach the footrest. She doesn't seem to mind at all. Sometimes I stand in the kitchen doorway and watch her, and I think about the morning I sat on this kitchen floor, Harold's mug broken beside me, a photograph on my phone of a wedding I hadn't attended, 3 days of silence that felt like a wall I couldn't see past. And I think, if I had closed the door that day, if I had decided the hurt was too large, if I had let the silence become permanent, I would have missed this. A little girl who carries Harold's name. A kitchen on Sunday mornings that sounds like a family again. A daughter-in-law who calls sometimes, just to say she's been thinking about me. A son who knocks now, but doesn't wait as long to come in. Harold always said that the people who hurt you most are usually the people who are carrying the most themselves. He said it without excusing anything. Just as a reminder not to make permanent decisions about temporary pain. I've thought about that a great deal this past year. About what it means to keep loving someone, even when you're angry. About what it means to leave a door open when everything in you wants to close it. About what it means to be the kind of family that survives, not because nothing went wrong, but because nobody stopped trying to make it right. If you're sitting somewhere tonight carrying something similar, a silence you didn't choose, a seat that was empty at a table you should have been at, a phone that didn't ring when it should have, I want to tell you that I understand, and that the hurt is real, and that you are allowed to feel every bit of it. But I also want to tell you what Harold would have told me. Don't decide anything today. Leave the door open one more day. See if someone comes. In my experience, they usually do. Thank you for spending this evening with me at Lantern House. If this story touched you, stay a while. There are many more by the fire.